Let's talk about The Night Wolf Inn by Anthony Huso. The first thing to say is, this is not a module. It says, this is a setting. The Night Wolf Inn offers a sandbox of vignettes. Many of these vignettes will kill 1st to 15th level characters with equal ease. The inn is a hub and a place to explore not all at once, but incrementally in the downtime between other adventures. So this is a first edition module, a modern publication. It was mostly written in the 80s by Anthony Huso, who has published many modules since, he's written more recently. And this was something he wrote in his first burst of playing D&D in the 80s. And then when he returned to, I think not when he returned to D&D altogether, but when he returned to first edition D&D, he brought it back out of retirement and got it out there. So the Night Wolf Inn is an interdimensional adventurers guild with, and the book has details of the guild's building, including what are basically a few dungeons. Plus, the key feature of the inn itself is these 20, as well as the kind of environment of the inn, is the 20 guest rooms which go to other planes that the DM will expand and detail. They're in here, but the DM expands and details. It's like in the cartoon Mr. Ben. You put on your costume and go to a different land or different part of history. Here, you go to a room. You can just sleep in there. There's a safe part of the room. But if you head beyond the room furniture into the wilds of the room, then you're in a different dimension and have different challenges and threats and opportunities. And what will slowly dawn on the DM reading it is that this is half background resource to have in your world for your players to access, to go and talk to people there, to explore and find resources, to go into the rooms, to use the basic resources of the inn. Like there's your membership includes a tattoo which gives you +1 AC, of course, which is very powerful. And then you realise that it's actually the most insane mystery and high-level adventure in the whole of the D&D canon. So it's half resource, background, setting, half insane mystery, high-level adventure. As I say, in some ways, the most sort of gonzo, is that the right word? Metal, over the top thing in the D&D universe, in one sense. I'm going to go on to spoilers, as I normally do with my RPG reviews. So if you are one of my players, tune out now. But the biggest criticism I'll make, really the only criticism or the only substantive one, is that there are severe organisational problems. They're absent from Anthony's later works. This is HU1. He's published 5 modules since. None of them have the same issue. But this is, this was the work of a teenager in the 80s. And it sometimes shows organisationally. Stuff's all over the place. There's not a table of contents. There's even stuff to do with the organisation of the inn itself, where you're flicking back between floors and maps to try to work out what's connected. So some of it's just annotation. The maps themselves are very good, I should say, but there's a thing about organisation when you're trying to read a dungeon that this can fall short on. Though there is a degree of cross-referencing, to find out more about this, go and look at this. There's very rarely page references. There's a lot of small things like that add up to be a big thing in terms of use that you have to put the work into making it work. Ben Lawrence at Mazirian's Garden has, in his review of this a few years ago, written review, he did suggest a sort of organisation of the material for your purpose as a DM running this. It also requires real commitment, not just in terms of that, but in terms of development and input from the DM in creating it, co-creating it in a way, to detail the other guild members, to detail the rooms themselves particularly. You're talking about 20 guest rooms, 18 normal ones and 2 special ones, where for most of them, not all of them, but for most of them, because they're entire worlds, there are a few pages in here on them, but you're going to have to put the work in as the DM. Now, that's fine. I don't think, normally you might say, well, that's terrible. I've bought a resource. I want all the details. But you've got to understand that here what Tony is offering is not all these infinite worlds detailed, but a setting and sandbox for you to unleash on your players. And when they go to a world, and you've got your 4 pages or 3 pages in here that you develop it from, that's one of many possible options. to detail all of those in an adequate way for lots of for the low effort DM. No criticism of the low effort DM, but to detail them for the low effort DM would require an extra, 80 or 100 or 200 pages, depending on exactly what detail people wanted. It's completely impractical. So instead, you've got to see this as lots of little opportunity bombs, things that are waiting to be unleashed, and which you as the DM then co-create. And that's certainly how I've taken it. I run this in 2 of my campaigns, and I may introduce it, or I'm going to introduce it into a 3rd, and they all connect because it's interdimensional, it's in different worlds at once, and so it connects my campaigns that way. And I don't mind that co-effort. So anyway, those are the caveats. You need to think about how you make the guild members and staff alive and relevant, because otherwise, you don't have to, but otherwise it becomes a far deader environment if there's not things going on in the inn, if the staff don't become relevant, and if other guild members don't become relevant as rivals or as potential allies. And also, you've got to design these whole worlds. But with that said, those pale in comparison to the enormous advantages and upsides of this module, or rather setting, or whatever you want to call it, HU1. Well, let's just talk about the rooms. In one way, that feels like the most obvious place to start, because you join this place, and the gimmick is that you can, for fairly small costs, go to these rooms and adventure in other worlds and keep all the stuff you find there. That you just pay a cover cost, which might be very cheap, might be 30 gold or something, or might be a lot more, might be hundreds or thousands of gold. Depending on the kind of difficulty and value of the room, of the demi-plane or whatever. That's the face value attraction, I think, of the guild. You get to go to all these other worlds and loot them or do whatever else. Now, there are a whole variety of rooms. Some are, I guess, more gimmick than anything, or feel more gimmick than anything. There's one, for instance, the node, which is the kind of perfect hexagon, and then you step out and there's millions of hexagons, and it literally says this was essentially an endless pad of hex paper, but it made of plastic. There's no treasures here, but there are Nolz's marvellous pigments that you can paint stuff on and create stuff on. So it's just a sort of, that is a gimmick room. That's not something on the whole. There are ways to fit it into a campaign. You can imagine dropping seeds for it, and Anthony does offer adventuring starters on every single room. So seeds, basically. But on the whole, that's more of a gimmick. However, most of them are, and the stream of consciousness, which is a pleasure barge going down a river controlled by thought, which could end you up in different dimensions. So there's a few, though that also has the enormously powerful Greater Horn of Valhalla. So even that, though it's a gimmick, is not a gimmick. It has other things going on that you might want to find or use. But most of the rooms are, as I say, demi-planes or planes. From the Forest of Dreams, which is a sort of half-shadowed dream world, fairy world, to the Restful Seas. I've run both of those, actually. The Restful Seas is an actual prime material world, but heavily water-based. Pirates, Sargasso, and things like that. And that was, we had a very memorable adventure there, which ended up going to the Shrine of the Kuatoa, because there was a thing where someone got sucked into the Underdark via a whirlpool, and everyone else used locate object, I think, to find where he'd gone in and stuff. And so that involved some improvisation, it has to be said, but that was a very enjoyable and entertaining diversion. There's the Comets Tail. You stand in a fountain of serpentine glass, like ice sculptured by sand. The forms are confusing and beautiful. Slowly you understand function within the menagerie. A bed, a chair, a glazed folding screen. The liquid forms of the furniture tremble with a gas blue radiance, leading your searching eye up. There a celestial thing burns cold against the starry sky, seemingly fixed, but the candent spectre of its tail impugns this illusion. You must be chasing the comet. The constant is your speed. So this is a room. You're on a comet, and there is a spacecraft in it, or can be a spacecraft in it, and it's got all kinds of potentially weird monsters on it. So that one is just an interesting different thing your players won't have done before. You know, end up going into a room and ending up on a comet. And there's many other rooms like this. The Murmuring Grasslands, the Cerebral Cliffs, I've run both of those. The Land of Nod is a ruined cathedral. We'll get back to that. There's Moon Crazy, where you end up in a parallel dimension, well, on another world which coincidentally has its own Nightwolf in and weird bat people. You've got Angel's Daydream, which includes, as far as I can tell, like, I don't know the exact reference, Anthony will have to tell me, Seraphim 7, CC, some sort of Gundam style medical robot. It's not, I guess not Gundam, something like that, but it seems very anime. Dream Sands, again, that is an archaeological dig, and you can end up finding mind flayers there, and so on and so forth. And as I said, there are 2 special rooms as well. Now, I say about a ruined cathedral, there's another world, room 5, the Belfry, which is the same, includes some of the same map. It's the same building as the Land of Nod. Wow, that's odd, isn't it? We'll get back to that, but a couple of these rooms indicate a pattern. The Belfry is a demon-ruled city where the humans kind of get on with stuff, but are somewhat terrorised by their demonic rulers. It's kind of half Hunchback of Notre Dame, half Fallen London, that sort of thing. And because your adventurers are the only people they know who could use magic, you can become heroes to them. You can help them. All the while finding out about this cathedral. As I say, we'll come back to that. I'll also say that the dungeon content is very good. The cellars are a fairly detailed 50 or 60 room dungeon with lots of weird stuff in it, kind of just throwing weird stuff at the wall, much of which connects into other stuff going on in the inn. There's also the attics are another micro dungeon really, and there's a dungeon within a dungeon within a dungeon, or something, the dark passage, where if you go down a particular corridor too far in the wrong way, you end up in another plane, and it has all its own special rules. There is, if you want some of the tone or taste of the book, it is the point at which the pages start going black. The Demon Idol, DP1, DP4, the Shadow Dragon, DP7, Awful Grotto, and so you've got a variety of things like that. That's on the second floor, third story. Now, I said these patterns link together, both in the cellars. You know, you go this way and you go up you can end up going up the high tower, and that's interesting. Well, what's at the top of the high tower? Oh, there's weird telescopes, and there's a black mirror, which is inscribed World Without End, and the telescopes don't make any sense, and there's dark lenses for telescopes, which you don't know how you'd even use in the context of looking at our stars. Okay, that's weird. There's a lab, and that's got something to do with World Without End. Oh, and there's these 2 rooms that both have this cathedral, one ruined on a sward of grass, one intact in a demon-ruled city. What's going on? Well, it's actually that there is an enormous set of mysteries, multiple mysteries at the heart of the Nightwolf Inn. Some are incidental or small. They're not particularly significant to the central plot of the meta-adventure. It's fair to say. So the Dark Passage is an example of that. Just a weird thing. Or the fact that you can end up going into a trapdoor operated by a sun, like a clock where the sun falls in a particular way, and then the passage opens, and you end up being transformed into a skeleton. But then if there's someone else there who's also a skeleton, because 2 of you can fit in there, then you start fighting, or you might start fighting unless you work out it's your friend. This stuff is just weird stuff that can have big effects. That one as an example. You live 1,000 years in the course of a year, you gain experience and immunity to stuff, but you also are undead. You know, there's loads of weird stuff like that. But the big, and you've got to work out how to operate that clock and stuff like that. But the big mysteries that are seeded all over the inn all feed into the same thing, which is the mystery of the inn itself. And that's basically, and this is, I should again be very clear, this is a very heavy spoiler, it's that the inn master is a 29th level lich who is trying to find the soul of his lost younger daughter, who is trapped within the inn by the deceits and wiles of an evil demonic entity, the Great Devourer, who is locked on a speeding comet of ice in the far future, locked there by Asmodeus. So that's the end game. 29th level lich demonic entity on a frozen ball of ice in the far future with no air, rescue, or at least release the soul or the fragment of soul of a little girl to go to the heavens with the rest of her family. And so the inn master wants to use the inn to get adventurers to come and go on adventures, to find powerful adventurers who can end up helping him do this. So the whole thing is a honey trap, but not to destroy people, but to save the little girl. And all these crazy things, I mean, dozens of things across the inn, all connect into that. Now, I don't think I can think of anything like that. It requires an enormous imaginative leap to run. You have to put work into running it. You have to help your players be interested in it. They may not be. But having seen my players, one of my groups develop a serious interest in it and just pick up stuff and be like, oh, wait, there's something else going on here, isn't there? It's so satisfying. This is undoubtedly a work of genius. A work of genius that there's not very many comparisons to, whether in real old school stuff, the height of Gary, or in modern OSR stuff. There are other supplements that are more usable. It's also, as this says, it's not a module. There are things your players will do there, like go to other worlds or go into the cellars, that are more adventure-like, and that's good. That content is provided, even if you have to work on it to some degree. But the big thing this offers, half of the purpose is, as I say, as a resource for your players to use and for you as the DM to use for your players, as a trailhead for adventures, or whatever else. The inn master can ask you to do guild missions, and that guild mission could just be, I've hooked in Anthony's Mortuary Temple of Esma as a guild mission. For instance, if you wanted to run a module, you could say, oh yes, go to this world and go and do this, and it's just expedition to the barrier peaks. But the other half, and you'd be missing the point of the module if you were to see this as an irrelevant distraction, is the fact that the whole thing is a puzzle. It is the biggest puzzle in D&D. It is solvable, though there is, I think, with great effort and difficulty and time commitment, it is solvable. And even now I can see my players beginning to put together pieces of that puzzle. But it requires effort and requires commitment, and only the very elite will do it. I don't know if it's ever been solved at a live table. Anthony does finish his discussion of the Starry Curse and all the secrets with, whatever you decide, the Master will certainly offer a vast treasure to the characters who achieve this unprecedented thing, including not only great troves of lucre, but also magic and the bestowal of a bouquet of wishes. When this happens, if I'm still alive, please send me an email from my site. This is, as I say, unique. It is itself an unprecedented thing. It's not for everyone. A lot of DMs will perfectly reasonably not want to put the effort into developing the worlds. They may think, well, I play 2 hours once a month with my friends. We want to have kind of anarchic Vancian adventures, not engage in this high first edition metal adventure where we end up kind of, we spend years solving this bizarre mystery. But for those who are excited by what I've said, by the prospect of what I said, this is available on Lulu. I'd recommend Anthony's other adventures too. I may review some in the future. But it is not, I think, overly demoralising for him, I hope, to say that this will stand as his magnum opus for those who are interested in what D&D can do. Particularly that question of what you can do to keep players involved at high levels and over the course of a whole campaign. If you've read it, if you've run it at all, I'd especially love to hear from other people who have run it. I'm the only person I know who's run it other than Tony. But if you have read it or run it, tell me what you think in the comments. Yes, I highly recommend it. Till next time.